Hey everyone, and welcome back to ScarletSprites. Just a quick one today, something I was doing anyways and decided to film and put a little context around. The Capcom CPS2 arcade hardware, home to a ridiculously great library of the 90s. You've got fighting games, shooters, beat 'em ups, puzzle games, franchises like Street Fighter, Marvel, Dungeons and Dragons, and even Alien and Predator mixed in. It's a really great gaming lineup. Most of you know I picked up a Capcom Big Blue earlier this summer with plans of replacing the Xmen vs. Street Fighter board with the Darksoft CPS2 Multi. I made that swap a while ago and now have this original Xmen vs. Street Fighter board from the machine that isn't in use, but I also don't want to have go to waste. And by that, I mean have the battery die inside of the unit. There's been a lot of development on this front in recent years, but at face value, under normal circumstances, if the battery inside the CPS2 game board failed or died, the game became unplayable. The B board holds decryption keys in memory that is maintained by the battery, and without those keys, the CPU is unable to execute the game. The failure of this battery and the resulting dead board is where the term CPS2 suicide battery was derived from. But it's 2020 and we don't have to live like this anymore. We have options to combat this. First, if your game isn't already dead, like my Xmen vs. Street Fighter, you can simply desolder the battery and install a new one that will likely grant you another decade or so. If the board is already dead, you have the Phoenix option, which is essentially amounting to burning a ROM set of your game that is already decrypted and then placing these new EPROMs onto your board. With this method, the board no longer needs a battery and you're good to go. The downside for some is that you are technically running altered game code at that point. There is a more elegant solution to this problem though, and one that doesn't require a battery or altered code, and that is the Infinikey. This is a small PCB that gets installed inside the CPS2 and contains all CPS2 decryption keys. By looking at your game's ROM chips and crosswalking them on a key table, you can configure the Infinikey to load the correct decryption key for your game. This method is generally the preferred one to preserve or even resurrect dead boards today. It is permanent and it only costs about 20 bucks. So that said, of course, I went the ultra cheap route on this one. I bought a replacement battery for $5 from Best Buy, which I'll link below. If I'm being completely honest here, I am probably only hanging on to this Xmen vs. Street Fighter board as a spare in case something goes wrong with my Darksoft Multi. If that happens, and hopefully it's not the Darksoft kit itself, I can then use the boards from this setup. Now for that matter, it doesn't really matter if it's suicided or not, and in fact, you end up removing the battery completely when setting up the Darksoft kit anyways. But by replacing the battery and keeping the board running, it does keep my options open should I decide I really don't need it. It's easier to sell something 100% working than it is if it's dead. So the first thing I did was to connect the board back up to the cabinet. It had been a while since it had been unplugged, and even though it has survived this long, well, I wanted to make sure I was still good to go and not installing a battery into an already dead board. And it looks like we're still in business here. Next is just a simple matter of using a Torx wrench to open the casing. I will mention that at this point there are those nice Capcom security stickers on the board which are completely intact, and it absolutely killed me to have to undo those to get to the screws I needed to. I did try a heat gun on them to try and lift without damaging them, but I didn't have much luck. It's unfortunate, but I did have to eventually just lift them to get inside. You'll notice when I open this up how absolutely filthy this is inside. Tons of dust, bunnies even falling out when it opened. So another nice benefit here is that I'll get to clean out 2 decades worth of filth. Here's a look at the battery we are going to replace. It's a Maxell Super Lithium Half Double A. And this is where the real magic to this swap comes in, because you guys know and have heard me say countless times that I'm not good at soldering or desoldering, but even an amateur like me can get this job done pretty easily with a Hakko FR301. And yeah, that's a legit statement. I wish that was a product placement ad because this thing cost me 200 bucks. But watch this. I just barely touch the pins, the solder melts, you pull the trigger on the Hakko to vacuum it up, and you're done. It was such a clean job, the battery fell right through the board. Super easy. Next, I'm just pushing the new battery's leads through the holes on the board, making sure that the positive is facing the right direction, and then just applying new solder. Again, the board was super clean and just a little bit of flux made this really easy. Last step for this is to just trim the excess leads to make this a little cleaner. I did say I was going to clean this up a bit, so I took both plastic casings and rinsed them in the sink. I'm a big fan of the Scrub Daddy. They're kind of the Hako of the dish cleaning sponges. Again, not a paid advertisement, but if Scrub Daddy wants to send some over for free, I'll find new and exciting ways to implement them into future videos. When cleaning these, you just want to be careful to keep from soaking the stickers on the B-board's casing. When I was done, thankfully, it was a nice hot August day and I could just set these outside to dry in the sun. So with the new battery installed and the casings now dry, it's time to put it all back together and test it out. I was pretty bummed about those Capcom stickers, and although it isn't quite the same, I'm going to use some double-sided tape to reapply them back onto the case. It's certainly not perfect, but it at least looks okay and saves me from having an emotional meltdown if I were to throw them out. So with everything back downstairs and plugged in several hours later, the board boots and plays just fine. This is probably good to go for at least another 5 years or so, maybe more if we want to push it. But again, it's really just a cheap placeholder for me in the moment until I decide what it is I want or need to do with this. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching me complete a random arcade chore on a Sunday afternoon. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you all next time. Later, guys.